stop talking about AI and talk about the problem you want to solve.
Today, I'm joined by Brendan Donoghue, Head of Digital and Customer Experience at UniSuper.
If you don't have empathy, you can't be a designer.
With over 25 years across Optus, Telstra and NAB, Brendan has led outcome-driven transformations, like compressing a 12-week account setup to about 90 seconds.
I had a journey map, I had vox pops, and depending on who I was talking to, we went a slightly different way on storytelling.
And lifting digital engagement from around 25% to more than 85%, including 87% of members over 60. He's known for translating design into executive scorecards, building clickable prototypes that win funding, and reframing no into show me how. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. We have done a podcast years ago now, so it's great to have you back on and getting an update on Brendan's life.
It is really wonderful to be back. I was just thinking the other day how long it had been and how much we'd gone through since that time. You know, we'd come out of COVID, so many of the changes you've seen globally, and then even in our own space here within the design community in Australia, so many of the changes we've been through.
13 or 14 years, and the last couple of years have just been turbulent, up and down. It's been interesting. But for anyone that doesn't know who Brendan is, can you give me a quick background snapshot on who you are, where you are now?
Absolutely. So, look, my name is Brendan Donoghue. For my sins, I am the head of digital and customer experience over here at UniSuper. UniSuper is one of the country's largest superannuation funds. I look after digital, and what that means is I look after the digital product ownership, the customer experience component, and the analytics component. And I think if you really want to be a successful CX leader, you need all or at least a couple of those within your portfolio so that you have what's the rich data, control over the models that you're using to predict where you want to engage, a handle on the design that's core as a creative leader, and then digital product ownership. If you're a design leader and you're not closely connected to that, the method of delivery, it's very, very hard to be an effective leader. But your question was, you know, where did I come from? So I've been here for 7 years. I've been working in digital delivery and design for probably about 25 years. And I've had an incredible career that's taken me through Optus, Telstra, the National Australia Bank, Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. And I've loved absolutely every minute of it.
Just listed off, you know, that some of the biggest companies in Australia, specifically from a design perspective as well. So I'd imagine you know everyone in the space because they've all been through those similar companies.
Look, I think there's a huge amount of the design community in Melbourne and Sydney that I've had the pleasure of working alongside of, because design's not exactly where it was a couple of years ago, but we had a real heyday where we were the epicenter of what was happening within organizations. And so particularly at places like, say, Telstra and the National, you know, you saw this huge investment in design. So we had these massive, massive teams. I think we've changed quite a lot, and that's where you're seeing the shift away from UI designers, service designers, UX designers, and move into these kind of umbrella terms, experience designers, product designers. So yeah, I've definitely been there during the heyday, but during those heydays, you know, what's that line, make hay while the sun's shining? We made strong inroads into, okay, how do we actually then have a connection into delivery? And I think today that's what sets so many of us up for success in these amazing teams in these massive organisations.
Obviously, you've worked in some big design teams. UniSuper, is it a lot smaller? Everyone's kind of does more with less? Or less with more?
You're definitely at a smaller organisation because there's a couple of different things about working at a member-owned super fund. And that is, number one, you've got a different stakeholder. So our stakeholder is the member. And so we're constantly thinking about, we're spending the members' money. This is money that has been given to us. It's invested on the members' behalf. Now, as an organisation, we earn an income through the fee revenue that's charged on those funds, but we are very, very careful to spend those funds wisely, because these are people who have entrusted us with what is their arguably largest or second largest asset they'll ever have. We want to make sure we're being very, very frugal. When you're at an organisation that has shareholders and a larger retail operation, your pressures are quite different, because pressures there are all about how fast can you grow? How fast can you get a product to market? If you're part of the big four, or if you're part of Optus and Telstra, if you're a similar sized organisation, there's that real pressure. If you don't move, your competitors will move. They'll get first mover advantage. How do you then make sure you're catching up? Superannuation's different. And so it's really different coming from that rapid retail background and coming into a space that's very conservative, that's very focused on how do we ensure compliance with a strong degree of regulation from the government, from the regulators, etc. And so it's quite a different experience because we're very focused then on how do we deliver these fantastic experiences? How do we engage people in a product, which is hard to get them engaged in? And how do you do that in a way that is both, respectful of the money that you're actually having invested, but also, you're quite aware that you're being compared to everyone else out there in the market. So you do want to stay ahead, but you want to do that without spending too much money.
It's a pretty good segue into, I guess, today's topic, which is the ROI of design. If you are spending members' money, I think taking it back to a business case perspective, like how do you ensure that the money that you are spending, specifically from a design perspective, is showing a return on investment? Now, obviously, we've had a previous conversation for this podcast, and we touched on an account setup taking 12 weeks, and you've been able to sort of shrink that down. I wanted to sort of go through that process, like what the problem was initially and how you've gone on that journey and what that looked like from a design perspective.
Can I answer that question by saying, quite a few years ago, I was part of the design practice at Telstra. John Colco had written the design thinking's time had arrived, this kind of seminal moment within design. He's publishing in the Harvard Business Review. It's being shared around the C-suite globally as this is our key to success. And I remember being a designer, a design leader in a major organization and thinking, this is our moment. Everything is about to change for us. And within 3 or 4 years, so many of us had seen the teams that we worked with let go, organizations walk back from these commitments. And what I thought was going to be a future of every major organization having a chief design officer, I think I could probably count them on about one hand today.
You can.
And I got obsessed with this idea of what went wrong. What went wrong? What did we do wrong as a community? Is it someone else? Is it us? And I arrived at this idea of the mistake that we made was assuming that people who had been working and thinking and doing things in a particular way for decades were suddenly going to shift and embrace a radical new way of thinking. And we waited for that moment to happen, and it didn't happen. And someone else then took that moment from us. The attention moved on, and businesses started to question, what's the value that I get from these big design teams? So to bring it back to this idea of the ROI of design, I think that as designers and design leaders, it's incumbent upon us to be able to translate what we do into a language that makes sense for senior stakeholders. So if I could go back in a time machine, I wouldn't be talking about, listen, the process of design is this, and this is how our research phase is going to work, and this is how our ideation phase, and come and look at some user testing. I would just say, we have a process and we will follow that process. But if you want to lift sales by X% or cut costs by X% or digitize by Y%, I will deliver that for you. And I will need so many months and so many millions of dollars. And as a design leader, if I can translate the value of what I do into those very practical and tangible outcomes for the executive leaders of these big businesses, I think we would have done a lot better. So today, as a creative leader, that's what I do with my team. I ensure that we're always talking about the value of our work in language that lines up perfectly with the company scorecard, with what the executive leadership team is looking at, and most importantly, my boss's scorecard. Because you better believe I come to work every single day and orient the team around making sure that my boss is getting exactly what she needs so that she can be a success in her role, because she then becomes my number one supporter. And so on with the executive leadership team and our CEO. You know, we're constantly aligned with what are they looking for and how do we make sure we're delivering on those outcomes. It's not for everyone. And there are some in the design community that think this approach is heresy, because we're effectively saying, look, we'll guarantee outcomes, or we'll focus on outcomes at the expense of our process. But my response to that would be, if we don't make this change, we may not get an opportunity at all.
Where does the funding come from? The funding comes from delivering and the return on investment. So look, it's all good following the process, but if that process isn't yielding a good result in the end of the day, the money dries up.
You know, I used to have designers that would say to me, I am so frustrated that the business doesn't understand what we do. And I'd say, yeah, I get that. Just a quick question. How does the business make money? And you'd be met with these blank faces. It's not a hard question. How do we make money? Be it a bank or a telco or whatever. Tell me how we make money. Oh, I don't know. Then how can you be upset that the business doesn't know the value of what you do if you don't even know what you should be targeting or where you should be impacting? You have to meet in the middle. You have to really understand how the business earns its income, what's important for those senior leaders, and then how you line up against that.
There's so many factors you need to understand. You need to understand like economic headwinds, where things are at with the business, because everything goes in cycles, right? Like you might be in a retraction phase at, let's say, hypothetically UniSuper, which means spending's less. You've got to work out how to improve what you're doing with less money to show that there isn't like an output, so your job's safe. Like I think, yeah, it's such a funny thing that people totally forget the business side, but that's why people are in business. That's why designers have a job. So it's definitely the right way to think, right? I think, how did you get to the point where you now realize that like that's how you had to communicate? Obviously, you're senior enough now that that's the only way you can communicate. But like, at what point was okay, this is how I actually need to shape or tell people what we're actually doing and how we do it?
Do you know what my breakthrough was? I'd gone and I'd actually gone and done my master's in design futures over at RMIT, which is kind of like a master's in design leadership or design service design. And I was really focused on this idea of what's the mistake that we made? How do we as an industry fix where we sit within businesses and rebuild this trust and rebuild our level of influence? And initially, I was fixated on this idea of we just needed to embrace risk, because I saw that as the key problem. That when we were asked, could you cut cost or could you increase sales? We said, I don't know. But if I have 16 weeks, I'll take over a room and I'll put all of my IDs up on the wall, and then I'll be able to draw something out. And after 4 months, I'll be able to tell you if I can do it or not. And you'd bump into a product owner who'd say, yes, I can cut those costs. Yes, I can. Guess who gets the money? Because decision makers at those organizations are looking for certainty and they're looking for confidence. So I thought as a design leader, what we needed to do was embrace risk. And we needed to say, yes, I'll do that thing. I think it's only part of the story though. And where I landed is that if you want to be an influential creative leader, you need 4 things. You firstly need craft excellence. So you need to be the best at the thing that you do within the organization. Otherwise, there's kind of no point for you actually being in the position you're in. Number 2, you need to be a really good people leader, because it's no good actually being great at design, but then being rubbish at people leading if you're trying to build a great design team. So don't think that craft excellence alone makes you a great leader. Really focus on the craft of leadership. Now, a lot of people think those 2 things is enough. Okay, well, I've got great design capabilities and I'm a good leader. Now the business should start promoting me. But you're missing business acumen. So you've got to be able to translate and understand what the business is trying to do. So these are things like, how does the business make its money? But it's also things like, how do projects get funded? How do reports get created? How is success of outcomes tracked? Because you constantly then want to position your work within the right way so that it's reported, it's tracked, it's shown at the right levels, etc. But that's still not enough. You'll get most of the way, but you won't get all of the way. And the last step, which is what I think is the hardest, is what I would term entrepreneurial behavior. And it's the ability to, as a creative leader, treat the design team as your own business and then be an entrepreneur, be a founder, and go across the business and champion what you do. Enter into conversations and promote the team, network, talk about the benefits of what you've done, be confident standing on stage or writing articles or appearing on podcasts and talking about everything that you do, and also engaging in risk and saying, listen, I can be trusted to deliver this thing. I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but I believe in the human-centered process so much that I can walk away with confidence knowing that as long as I get the funding and as long as I have the time, I'll be able to deliver that outcome.
It makes so much sense. And like, I think I'm lucky, obviously, running the podcast where I get to speak to design leaders like yourself. And it's such a common thread that I think is missed in design. People wanting to understand the business, people wanting to become like the entrepreneur in a business or in a design team. Because I think for me, that's the fun part in business or working with people like yourself is understanding how businesses operate, what actually makes them work and what makes a good business work better than a not so good business. Like, what are they doing differently? And I think like there's lots of really good examples that companies that embed design throughout the process, like Airbnb, like they do exceptionally well. So like just trying to like pick businesses apart to understand what works, what doesn't work, and then implement that back into your job and how you do your design, or well, for me, run a design consultancy, right? Because then we understand what's happening in the market. That's how we help our clients. So it's a fun space to be in.
It really is. You mentioned Airbnb. You know, Airbnb is such a fascinating example, and so many of these tech businesses, Airbnb is somewhat unique because you've got that strong design leadership that sits within the kind of corporate or the executive suite of the business. I think sometimes we look at these organisations and we assume that that decision making can be applied straight into Australian corporate. And Australian corporate is a very, very different beast because the people who work inside Australian corporate, and I say this as someone who has done this now for nearly 20 years, you know, decisions are not made in the same way as you do at a tech startup in San Francisco. It's a very different level of risk. There's a very different type of regulator. And so there's a lot more risk avoidance. And as a designer, I think if you lean into it in the wrong way, you pitch your work in a way that doesn't fill decision makers with confidence. And I think that's where we can end up missing a trick because we've got the right answer, but we've given it in the wrong way. And so we're passed over and someone else picks up that opportunity. And sometimes, you know, project funding, it's a bit of a zero-sum game. If you don't get funded in 1 year, you won't get funded until the next year. So you've got to put your best case forward and ensure that you can unlock that funding now so you can do that work this year, deliver it next year, and then maybe build on it. If you don't get started for 6 months or 12 months, you know, you can really be behind the eight ball then, particularly if others have gone to market with a similar product. And then you're chasing them instead of being out in front and defining that experience for everyone.
That is a really good point. Like, we've worked with startups, scale ups, SMEs, and enterprise, and every company is so different when it comes to getting funding, running projects, working with internal teams. Like enterprise, things move slow, like having to go through procurement, go through legal, get funding, and then implement something could take years. Whereas in a scale up, that could be weeks. And sometimes they're getting just as much funding to get that project off the ground because they've got money coming in. And then just understanding that audience, how to deal with them, how to, I guess, see things through their eyes so they understand what the benefit is to them. And this is going back to your example of understanding your exec's goal so you can support them. It's the same with any business, right? Like understanding who you're talking to, what their drivers are, and then finding out a way to show them the value of design.
Absolutely. You know, a couple of years ago, we were talking about what's the best capability that someone could have in an internal design agency to ensure success. This is in a corporate institution. And we were like, is it empathy, you know, or is it the ability to really understand users? And I don't think it is. For a long time, I thought it was. But I think that's just the ticket to the ball game. If you don't have empathy, you can't be a designer, right? So it's just like saying, well, you should be a good designer to be a good designer. What I think the trait is that you really want to focus on developing to be a success in these complex organizations is the ability to just be relentless. And it's to push through the roadblocks, to pick yourself up off the canvas when you get told no or you get pushed back on. And so, in that example you just gave of a corporate institution taking years to make a decision versus a startup that makes it in days or weeks, if you're the person pushing that idea in the corporate, you have to keep pushing. The businesses need you to keep advocating for it, even if it takes a long time, because no one else is going to advocate for design if the design team isn't willing to do it. So I talked to my team about how do you embody relentlessness? And so you just keep going with an idea. And I'm not talking about going with the wrong idea, but it's having the confidence to push forward and say, we've done our testing, we've done our research, we know that this is the right solution. Let's get funding for it, let's get it built, and then let's ship it so that we can get it into our members' hands. And it's just keeping pushing even when times are tough.
I want to circle back now to the 12-week setup process. Like, did you have to pitch for funding to that? Was there people saying that no, this isn't going to work? We're not going to be able to reduce a 12-week setup to, what is it now, like 30 seconds or something?
Oh, you're talking our account setup. So
Yeah.
just to frame this, this was where I had done a research piece years ago when I'd first started at UniSuper. And we had, for a subsection of our accounts, you'd start at a university, you'd fill in your paperwork, you'd submit your paperwork to the university, and it wouldn't be until the payroll cycle had run, they'd send us a file, we'd create the account, and we would then send you a letter. So say, welcome to UniSuper. And for some members, that could take up to 12 weeks, right? So it was 2020s, right? And we're taking 12 weeks to set up some of our accounts. These were low engagement, low fund, high propensity to churn, high likelihood to complain. And we did a research piece on what was going wrong in this process. And out of it came 10 different opportunities. We could fix comms around sign up. We could train our call center better with different scripts. We could change what's on our website. But I think where good design leadership is the ability to look at all of these options and say, no, the one thing we're going to do is move join all the way back to the start. And we shifted from 12 weeks to set up the account to 90 seconds. And we enabled those people to join themselves. So we created a digital join form. We gave it to our employers. The employers put it in front of new members, and the members fill that form in, providing all their details. We set the account up. So onboarding went from 12 weeks to 90 seconds. How did I sell that story internally? I sold it by saying, I'm going to cut onboarding from 12 weeks to 90 seconds, because that's all that anyone needed to hear. They went, I get it. I understand why we would do that. I had a journey map. I had vox pops. And depending on who I was talking to, we went a slightly different way on storytelling. I had one executive leader in particular who just didn't see the value in what we were doing, just didn't see the value. And it wasn't until I played them a vox pop of a member saying that I don't trust you. And as soon as he heard that, he said, hang on a second, they don't trust us. Whoa, everything I do is built on having their trust. If we've lost their trust, then my work can't work properly. Brendan, you have to fix that. How are you going to get it back on board? All right, great. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to reduce it down to 90 seconds. Because if a member tried to engage us at any point in that journey, do you know what we used to do? We used to tell them to go away. Go away, we're not ready for you because we haven't set up the account, so call back in a few weeks. You get frustrated with that process and you just think, who am I dealing with? So the shift to 90 seconds was, we knew what we needed to do because we had lent into and done the research and done that journey mapping and done the prototyping without being asked. We just lent in and we did it. So this is where I talk about take that risk. Take a pitch on where you think the design work's going to go and do it. So then you've got something ready when you're showcasing to people how this will work. Very quickly, I took that into a clickable prototype. And that's the other thing, as a design leader, clickable prototypes, they are your holy grail, because it doesn't matter where you are, anyone in the business can understand a clickable prototype. They just play with it. Oh, I get what's going on here. All right, I can fund that. I'll support this request. So that's how we managed to get that down and secure the funding, so that when we went into that funding application process, we were right at the top. Because all across the business, I'd lined up the senior executive leadership around this idea of, if you have this, less calls come into the call center, less complaints come into the complaints team, less work for the operations team, better market position for the investments team. Everyone was behind the change. And so I had a groundswell of support for what we were doing. I didn't have to try and change opinions. I just said, this is the solution to the problem. And then they stepped in behind that.
Let's go back to the initial. Did anyone push back on you saying, all right, I think I can take the 12-week current account setup situation to 90 seconds? Like, that's insane improvements, right? And like, from an operational efficiency perspective, less paperwork, less calls, quicker, I guess, people through to custom onboarding. Like, there's no real negatives there. But like, how did you come up with the idea that you could get it down to 90 seconds and then pitch that to the business and be able to get the buy-in without, like, because like, for me to go, all right, I'm going to fund that, it's a pretty outlandish statement. I can take this from 12 weeks to 90 seconds, right?
I think as a creative leader, particularly someone that has ownership of a digital product, it is incumbent upon you to constantly advocate for improvements. So what's funny about this 90-second timeline is I was really disappointed that it was 90 seconds. I wanted it to be 5 or 10. So the fact that it was 90, I felt really unhappy, but that was the best that we could do at the time, right? So that for me was already a trade-off, where I'm like, fine, we'll do 90 seconds, I understand. So then you can't do real-time messaging. Now you've got to drop people into an email channel and make sure that you're staying connected with them. Most interestingly is I didn't actually have a lot of pushback on that, because what I found was inside the business were a lot of people that wanted to do it better. But there just wasn't someone willing to take the risk and say, I will run this change and I will own if it succeeds or fails. So you are safe. If it fails and we've tried our best, it'll be on me. It's not on you, be it operations or legal or anyway. I will take the heat for this change. And as soon as people understood that, they tend to actually stand behind and support the change. What's really interesting, though, is of that change, the one area that I initially had challenges with was our legal team. And I went up to the legal team and I said, hey, listen, really quickly, I want to get members to onboard themselves. Can we do that? And they said, oh, no, definitely not. There's no way. And I said, I'm so sorry, I'm asking the wrong question. I said, I'm going to get members to onboard themselves. Can you tell me what I need to do to make sure that that is compliant? And they said, oh, that's fine, of course. So it's this and this and this. Because you think about the difference in the question, right? The first question I'm asking, are you willing to like take a risk here and sign off on something? But as soon as I'm saying, listen, I'm doing this, just tell me how to stay compliant. Oh, I understand how I can help you. That's fine, I can do these things. So the change was something that I took a little while to work out exactly how long it would take to create that account. It was something that I had championed within the organisation and taken on all of that risk myself. And listen, over the years, I've noticed people talk about our projects in a variety of ways. When they're going well, they're UniSuper's project. When it's going badly, it's Brendan's project, right? So it's as long as I'm putting my neck on the chopping block constantly, you get the opportunity to do the big changes. It's just on you to make sure that you're then getting them right or owning them when they don't go well.
How did you step into a space where you're confident enough in who you are to be putting your neck on the line? Because like, that's a big thing in any job, right? You don't want to be the person that made the call and it not work. So how did you get to the point where you were happy to do that. You thought that was the right way.
I really, really, really believe in design. So I genuinely believe in the human-centered design process, and that if we follow our process, we get to the right outcome. So when we were looking at that, I didn't look at a problem and go, oh, I know the answer. I actually looked at the problem. We did our research, we did our journey mapping, we understood exactly the opportunity that we could make, or the impact that we could have. And then I pitched the solution. So I'd actually used design to get to that point, number one. Number two, it's not a bad story, but it's me after, you know, what at that point was almost, say, 15 years in design leadership. So I've had a long history. I've built up, what is that, like calluses. I've got the scars on the back, right, of projects that have gone wrong and changes that have gone wrong. But really early on in my career, I learned that leadership is fleeting and influence can be fleeting. And if you don't use it when you've got it, it will disappear and then you won't be able to get it back. So really early on, as a design leader coming into a new organization, use your runway wisely and build up that level of influence. So this was one of the first things that I did within my sort of first year and a half here at the organization, whilst I still had a runway in front of me where I had their good grace and opportunity to try different things. That's when I was leaning into some of these things. But it's not easy. You don't always have that level of support. You know, I joined a company once and wanted to sit near the digital team because I knew that design is closely connected with digital and needs to influence what they were doing. And was told by the digital team, there's no desks here, mate. If you want a desk, you'd have to bring your own. And so on one Thursday evening, I did. I put two desks in the lift and somehow managed to get them up without completely breaking everything. And I wired them up. And Friday morning, I was like, g'day, I'm here. And they weren't happy, but they weren't unhappy enough that they kicked me off the floor. They put up with me. But guess what happened? I started to hear the conversations and I started to hear what they were talking about. And I started to get those taps on the shoulders that were like, hey, you know a bit about this. Could you help us with this form or with this change? So I did that. I brought up one of my other UX design leads as well. And it was horrible for about a month and a half. We were blamed for everything. Every retro that we went into, it was all design's fault because we'd slowed everything down. We were asking too many questions. We were disruptive. And then we shipped and it worked. And overnight, everything changed for us because suddenly it wasn't us asking these questions and being annoying. It was, hang on a second, we've had less complaints, we've had fewer bugs, we've got less rework. How do we get you involved in more things that we're doing? And so then it was, how many desks could we actually put on the floor? Not, can we actually have some influence and some buy-in? But I think it's just that first act. It would have been so easy to stay on another floor, stay in our little group and complain about not being listened to. But I took that very first small step and said, I'm going to take a risk position. I'm going to stick my neck out here and I'm going to walk into the lion's den and stay, because I know that that's what I need to do as a leader. And that created a space then for my UX team to follow. And it also put the focus on me, that I was the disruptor, but not the whole team. And so that the team had an opportunity to partner with their peers in digital and start to do the work. If anything went wrong, it was my fault, but if it succeeded, it was the team's success.
Sounds like a similar situation to UniSuper at the moment. It's UniSuper if they succeed, and then Brendan as well. Look, in regards to the account setup, right? It's such a good example of how design can have a really clear ROI. But what was the measurable business impact? Like, where did you start with, like, you kind of understood how obviously reducing that time would work, but like, did you start now looking at different business units? All right, well, now you're getting less calls to customer support, or there's less tickets here with issues of accounts. So like, how did you go across and then, I guess, in retrospect, go, this is the measurable result that this is impacting UniSuper with?
Well, one of the best things, so that change, when you think about that change, we had to build a business case that needed to have a net positive value of the investment associated with the change. So however much money that we were spending on that change, it needed to be better spent making that change because it had saved the business X amount of dollars, and that was a better investment than just leaving it in the bank. And so it's really tough writing these business cases sometimes because you want to write them and you want to say, well, the member will be happier, and can't we use that as a measure? And we'll use channel NPS score or something, right? But the problem with that is it's kind of us as a creative team and as a design industry talking about ourselves. So we've created these measures, or we've played a strong part in the creation of some of these measures, and that's particularly stuff like CSAT, SuperQ, struggle scores. You've got these measures you can use for your channels. But at the end of the day, if you're sitting on the board, you're really interested in cost to serve, retention, growth. So you want to see things that are impacting on one of those three. So this then became a play for us around acquisition. We were going to acquire more members through this channel. And it doesn't mean like more members would sign up, but more members would actually engage with us and roll over. Because as a super fund, the most important transaction that you can have for someone in a super account is the rolling over of funds, so that they close the other super account they've got, they merge in with you. It's great for the member because they're paying less fees. If they've chosen you as the super fund of their choice, then they can stay engaged with one fund. It's hard to stay engaged with two. And from a fund standpoint, it's great because you've now got all of that account in one place. You're not running the chance of the member getting disengaged with you, and you've simply got more funds under management so that you can actually then utilize those funds to find the right investment for the member, give them the right advice, etc. So you want the member to roll over, and that was effectively how we built that financial business case. We would improve funds under management, but we also knew that we would improve engagement, and we would improve the chance of them using digital as a channel of self-service and take them out of a high-cost channel like calling the call center or coming in and seeing one of our offices, or filling in paper and posting it off. And so over the years, what I've been doing is every business case builds on this premise of I'm going to increase the engagement I've got with our members, the level of digital engagement. I'm going to increase the level of digital self-service. And then I'm going to increase the level of online safety that you have as well. Because if you're not doing that third one, what actually happens is you do all the others, you move everyone online, and then you have a cyber incident, and everything that you've done to date is undone. So every single item I'm doing is trying to hit 2 or 3 of those items at every point, increasing engagement, increasing capability, and then increasing online capability. Where I am today, I have 85% of my members are digitally engaged. 87% of my members over 60 are digitally engaged. Now, when I was at a bank, right, 87% of people over 60 being digitally engaged would be world leading, because you tend to not see that. You tend to use the shorthand of your older members aren't as digitally engaged. But superannuation's a really unique product in that your level of engagement goes up the older you are, because you want to know how much money you've got day to day. Most Australians go through and aren't overly engaged with superannuation until they turn 55. Then they wonder how long they've got until they can retire. And then they log in and have a look at how much super they've got and go, it's not enough, I need more. And then they log in every day from that moment forward, seeing how it's growing and then how it's going in retirement. So my job is to build these really great digital experiences that engage people early, keep them engaged, and then work in those later moments of life. So to come all the way back to your question of how did we build the business case, we built it around those measures of increasing engagement, reducing cost to serve, and increasing the connection with the member and making them safer. Because if you're digitally connected, we can use multi-factor authentication, we can text you, we can email you, to make sure that the person who submitted this withdrawal request or transfer request is the person that we think we're dealing with. And by hitting all of those, it made the change a bit of a slam dunk, because it wasn't so much about Brendan shifting the account creation time. It was, hey, this is a smart investment for us as a fund because it's going to increase engagement, make our members safer, and increase our connection with them.
What's the when you started? What was the I guess engagement rate with your older members, and how has that increased over time?
Look, I can tell you in 2020, 25% of our members were digitally engaged. So in 5 years, I've taken that, we have shifted that from 25% to over 85%.
Do you even need to pitch for funding anymore, or do they just give it to you?
No, you have to keep pitching for funding because you have to keep justifying what you're doing. We've lifted our level of influence inside the business. And I think as a design leader in this business here, I've had the opportunity to build a level of influence that I definitely didn't have previously as a design leader, as a creative leader. But that's because I think by this point in my career, I had worked out how I needed to position what I was doing from a design standpoint. And I think that's the thing that I want to be doing in conversations like this is saying, hey, here is a way that you can follow, or a methodology that you can follow as a creative leader to actually build influence, secure funding, and secure those opportunities to drive change. But to counsel that it doesn't come easy, that there are definitely moments where you've got to put your neck on the chopping block and really, really trust the process and hold yourself to account, because that's the only way that you will build influence. It's really easy to come in as a design leader and say, listen, this is the process. You start here, you do your double diamond, you get to the end, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but hey, it's not on me. I did the process. I did everything right according to the process. I'm saying you should take some risk and you should say, Joe, I'll deliver that increase in sales. And you don't know how exactly you're going to do it, but you trust the process will work. And along the way, you alter what you're doing to focus on the outcome and not just strict adherence to the process. And I talk about it often, it's like outcome orientated design and not process orientated design.
It sounds exactly the same as running a business to a degree. Like we come up with an idea of where we want to be, and then we work out how we get there as we go, because things change, things pivot. You just got to work with it as things go, right? But if I was like, let's say a design leader in another business, I've got my own 12-week onboarding experience. Like, where would you start? Like, how would you go into the business, understand what their requirements are, what their drivers are, what their metrics need to be, and relate it back to them? Like, what would be your process, or what was your process in this instance, so you could pass that on to anyone else going through a similar situation?
Just to go back a step, so if you're a design leader and you're in a business and it's taking you 12 weeks to create a new account, number one, start with what's going on in that time. Why is it taking 12 weeks? Before you rush in and try to solve the problem, really understand what is the problem. And get into, do a service map, right? So understand exactly what's happening in the back end, as well as the kind of operational layer and then that experience layer for the customer. And understand, number one, does it matter? Is the customer actually impacted by this time? If they are, quantify what that impact is, because that's the key for you to then actually build your business case for change. Number two, before you do anything else, understand what you can change. So be ambitious here and say, right, you want to move this from 12 weeks down to 1 day, down to 10 seconds, whatever it is, depending on your situation. And your service map will tell you that. It'll tell you where you can influence. And then be bold, right? Don't go for the easy option. Go for the hard option and let other people push you back. There's nothing that frustrates me more than watching really incredible design leaders negotiate with themselves. And they say, oh, if I pitch 1 day, people will think that that's a bit too fast. Maybe I should pitch for 2. No, pitch for half a day and let someone else move you back to 1 day, right? Don't go in with the easy option. Go in with the hard option all the time, because that's the ideal user experience or the ideal customer experience. Let tech, let operations, let whoever shift you back. Do not pre-negotiate with yourself and censor yourself before you walk into that conversation. So you've done that, now you've worked out how far you can go. Don't talk to anyone yet. Create a prototype of that experience in whatever fidelity you want to do. because that's now the thing that you're selling. You're selling a change to onboarding that now looks like this. And that's what you're selling, not Brendan's solution, not Joe's solution, but a new onboarding solution. And the new onboarding solution will work like this, and you can have a play with it right now, but it will save us X amount of millions of dollars a year because we don't have people dropping into all these other channels. It'll retain X% of members because they won't leave because they get frustrated. And it'll grow our business by X because we've worked out that people that onboard shorter have an average tenure of 2 years longer, and so we can make more sales during that time, or a greater likelihood of keeping them when they would otherwise churn. And you build the business case around that, and that becomes your story. At UniSuper, we used to talk about that project became shift left because we'd shifted onboarding all the way left when you looked at the service map. And it's just being able to brand it and label it as well, so you can talk about it internally. Still, years later, we talk about that project as an example of the right problem being solved and not just hitting it with a shopping list of things to improve.
I'm curious because you talk about numbers and metrics and values, and I think this is a common thing that designers probably shy away from. Like they go, I've made this a better customer experience or this a better user journey, right? How have you gone to, well, where have you started in terms of understanding how to, I guess, build those metrics to make sure that they are hitting the right things that executive needs to see?
I started here at UniSuper. I had a team of two, which was a very big change. I had a massive team over at the National Australia Bank. But I came in, I had a team of two. First role that I hired was actually user tester, because I knew that if I could quantify what was going on with the experience, then I'd be able to build a case for change, as opposed to just jumping in and fixing things. And so what it then meant was, today still, we test almost everything before we write a single line of code. And so we can then quantify this design is likely to add one more member out of every 10, or it's performs 10% better than this design. Okay, fantastic. We've built deep analytics and we test and target everything. So we understand when we changed the website to better position self-service capability, that we could track an increase of X% going to self-service over picking up the telephone and calling the member centre team. And so it's actually taking the decision to build in the analytics. It's taking the time to test things before you build them. And it's really about quantifying the impact by whatever means you can. Now, I didn't have any deep analytics when I started, so I had someone test mock-ups of different experiences and be able to quantify experience one outperforms experience two, by 50%. And so great, okay, now we can justify that. As you go into funding, why didn't you do the other one? Because this one performs 50% better. And guess what you test as well? You test your baseline. So we tested it against our current state experience and it outperformed it by X. If we extrapolate out and we go into market, we should see an increase in performance of Y. We tested our old website. We had an old website, hadn't been updated for about 7 years. And it was something that it had been so long since it had been updated that it was almost too difficult to update. So I came in and said, let's do some testing here and let's understand how it's performing. We had no analytics in the website. And so we did some test completion testing. We got people in to understand, look, if we asked you to do these key tasks, how likely are you to be able to complete them? And the results were shocking. So we saw about 50% of people that we were testing, and this was a mass quantitative test. About 50% of people failed to find the information or the self-service capability that they wanted online. 50%. Right? We said, okay, hang on a second. If we update the information architecture of the site, how can we improve it? And so we iterated and we iterated and we iterated, and today it's about 85%. And it's hard to get above 85%. It's about 80 to 85%. It's hard to get above that because not everyone thinks the same. You've always got a percentage that think differently. And so their method inside their mind of where information is organised is different. And so that's where things like on-site search become really important. Um, we were able to quantify when we pitched for the idea of changing the website. I'd done the same thing again, right? So I had a prototype of the new website and it looked flash, right? It looked fantastic. It was sleek. It was clean. I was able to explain, if we implement this, this is the increase that we'll see in performance. This is how it will change where we sit from a search engine optimization standpoint, because it's a much lighter site versus what we've got today. It'll work on mobile, so we know straight away it'll increase 30% the people who can actually use it. Up until that point, we had about 30% coming in and looking at it on a mobile phone, and they were getting a completely different website because it wasn't a responsive site. And so we're able to put all these measures around it. And when we came into the funding cycle, we were one of the first ticked off because everyone already knew what they were going to get. It wasn't the public website refresh project and the design team's going to take a while to go and work out what they're doing and then they'll come back. We had one designer work with one person from the brand team, I think for about 3 months, just on what would we do if we went back to the drawing board on this and doing your user testing. So you've got a mid-fidelity prototype that you've been able to show, but it's enough to rally everyone around so that they can understand this is the thing that I want to get behind and support.
Such a good example. I can't believe you hadn't changed your website in 7 years. That seems like an incredibly long time, especially in the last couple of years.
Do you know what? It wasn't, it's really interesting. It wasn't for lack of trying. So my predecessor had tried for a few years to get the funding to make the change. He knew that they had to change. He knew they had to implement a responsive site. But I think it was the lack of what is it that I'll get from the investment that makes it hard sometimes for design-led or digital-led change to be effective. And this is where I think we've got this incredible opportunity. You've got these great tools, your Figmas, etc. Create the prototype, get it in front of people, particularly the decision makers, and get them comfortable with what they'd get from the investment. And I think the chance of you getting funded increases significantly.
It seems like a very common thread through this entire conversation has just been communication style, obviously being willing to put your neck on the line and then showing them what the results could potentially look like and then just chasing that. So I think maybe in a lot of cases people shy away from trying to do too much and put themselves out there. Maybe that's to the downfall of design. So, like, what's one piece of advice you'd give to a designer or a design leader wanting to really create impact within? It doesn't matter if it's an enterprise or a scale up. Like, where should they start? What should they be focusing on?
I think if you want to have an impact, we've talked a lot about those kind of the key things that I've talked about. Build up
Yep.
those 4 capabilities, be relentless. On top of that, I think the one piece of advice that I'd give to anyone in the design community is be bold. Every time I look back in my career, I've never once regretted being bold. I've always regretted, we could have gone a bit further on that. And that's that idea of you're the creatives inside the business who have this unique opportunity to reshape experiences. Not everyone has that. Only a small percentage of the whole organization has that. Don't be timid. Be really bold in the changes that you want to make and let other people push you back from that. But be bold to start with and push all the way out to the edge. A little while ago in this interview, or in our chat, you talked about, businesses take up to a year to make a decision. We're the same here. We can take up to a year. Sometimes we can take 2. My job is to talk incessantly about where we're going to go. And I can tell you every single time I'm not doing it timidly. I'm talking about here are the big changes we're going to make. Here's the big things you're going to see from things like your mobile app or digital advice or our changes to our member online platform. And it's constantly talking about that makes it real for everyone. And so then they start to accept this is what we're going to do. Funding arrives, you go and do the change, deliver the change. But I'm always a year or two ahead of where we are today. I'm talking about where we're going. So I have to be bold and not just talk about, oh, it'll be mostly the same, but it'll be a little bit extra, because very quickly you get run over or you lose people's attention, and they move on to the next thing.
I think it's a really good tip. A lot of people are very short-sighted when they're, I guess, maybe setting goals or targets. So like they talk in months as opposed to years. And I think when you are in a company that's the same size as UniSuper or bigger, right? Like they don't move in months. It is in years. So like if you are trying to be bold, there's only so much you're going to get done in a month's time. But maybe in 2 years' time, you could have some pretty big impacts.
Spot on.
Brendan, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I think unpacking some of the changes that you've made at UniSuper really kind of, I guess, solidifies how important design is for any business. And when you do it right, there is a huge return on investment. So once again, appreciate you jumping on. It's good to catch up. And I think, takeaways from this have been really, really strong. I think is a good business case for anyone to go into a pitch for more money or project to improve the experience. But once again, pleasure jumping on. If anyone wants to reach out, what's the best way to connect with you via LinkedIn?
Yeah, please connect via LinkedIn. It's the place where I manage to stay connected with most of the industry. So hit me up there. I'm more than happy to have a chat.
Beautiful. Now, you seem to be all over the place with podcasts, presenting. What's next for you? Have you got anything lined up?
Do you know what? I finally have a gap in my calendar. So I'm really looking forward to just taking a beat for a second. I'd recently been on stage in Singapore talking about AI. And I'll note that we've made an entire podcast without talking about AI.
Right. It's the first podcast in a while, I think, for anyone.
Look, just on that, number one, if you're a creative leader, take all the opportunities that come in front of you to connect with the industry and to fly the flag, right, for design and design leadership. Because it's really important that we continue to make sure that our voices are heard, particularly in this moment of disruption. The second one is the number one message that I took away from this international conference really focused on AI is stop talking about AI and talk about the problem you want to solve. Because we have fallen into the trap of letting the technology be the forefront. And what we need to focus on is the problem that we want to solve and choosing the right tool to solve that problem. Now, you had a discussion recently on this very topic, right? Where you were looking at how do designers play that key role in the development of AI? It's spot on. I think that we've been spooked for about a year or two on what's it mean for our jobs and what's it mean for our industry. And I am now convinced it's not going to take our jobs. It needs us to be a success. And we need to rush in and embrace it and show organizations that the tech solution, again, is not the right approach to take, but the human-centered, customer-centric approach is the right one, and then help them choose the right tool to enable the outcome they want to get to.
It's scary stats on how many AI implementations or projects fail. It's like 80% or something ridiculous. And it's because it's engineer-led. They're just trying to build stuff. And I think a lot of people are seeing AI as a C-suite are going, we need to be seen as implementing something AI, but they're not trying to focus on what are we trying to solve here, and taking it back to the customer problem or the user problem first, and they're just building stuff, and that's why everything's failing. So I think you're exactly spot on. It's been a nice conversation not to have to talk about AI, because I'm the same. I think I'm AI'd out at the moment. Don't get me wrong, I use it, love it. I just think it's more around what is AI helping us solve, and how we're using it. It's the same as automation, right? It's just another thing.
Here.
Well, once again, absolute pleasure. So thank you for jumping on.
Thanks for watching. Now remember, please hit subscribe. And if you could leave us a like and a comment, it helps people like yourself find the video.